Today's lecture is going to be on a topic that a lot of people really don't know the actual history of, the Moors. Now, before I start, I want to define to you the many terms of Moors. And these terms depend on what subject you're discussing and what a Moor is about. See, a Moor can be defined as a navigator. A Moor can be defined as a person with dark skin. A Moor, another definition of a Moor, is the historical Moors that left Morocco, Africa, and invaded Europe. These are the Moors that we're going to talk about. A lot of people get these definitions of the Moors mixed up. These definitions are speaking of separate people with a separate definition according to the subject matter that you're referring to Moors as. Now, for this video, we're going to be speaking specifically about the Moors from Morocco that invaded Europe. The year was 70 AD when the Moors went and invaded Europe. They conquered it without a lot of bloodshed because the people of Europe at that time, they weren't ready for a war. So the Moors conquered it, and true enough, they stayed there for 700 years, in which at that time, around 1492, give or take a few years, the Moors reclaimed their lands back. Well, the Europeans reclaimed their lands back from the Moors. The Moors were not banished at this time. The lands that they owned, they were allowed to keep. The wealth that they acquired, they was allowed to keep. Their political power was just taken from them. And they were also told that if they were to remain in Europe, they would have to submit to Christianity, which at that time in Spain was run by the Catholic Church. So that, in fact, that they would have to submit to Catholicism. Well, those that didn't agree with that were free to leave, and they took their wealth, sold their lands, took their wealth, and they moved back to Africa, which they were well received, because during that time, Africa, the continent of Africa, and the continent of Europe were engaged in trading goods, as well as slaves. A lot of people don't realize that there was a slave trade before the transatlantic slave trade. It was called the Mediterranean slave trade, and it predated the transatlantic slave trade by hundreds of years. When the Moors conquered Europe, they took slaves of the Europeans and sold them to different continents and kingdoms in Africa, and vice versa. The Moors conducted slaves from Africa and sold them to people in Europe. That's why you have Europe was full of people of color, Africans, during that time. It wasn't just the Moors that was in Europe. It was slaves from Africa in Europe, as well as, if you go in Morocco now, you will see a lot of European-looking people. These were slaves that were sold from Europe to Africa. There was an exchange of people. Let me say that again. There was a huge exchange of people. Now, getting back to the story. Those Moors that decided to stay in Europe after the Europeans finally regained control of their lands again, they were told that they would have to convert to Christianity. A lot of them didn't want to leave, but they didn't like that idea of converting to Christianity either. But you had some that was all right with it. They converted to Christianity, became European citizens, or the citizens of whatever country that was hosting them at the time, and they lived peacefully amongst the Europeans. Now, this bunch of Moors that didn't like that agreement and didn't want to leave and go back to Africa, later in time developed a plan to retake the lands that they lost in Europe. And this plan failed. It absolutely failed. And this time, the Europeans felt betrayed. They condemned those Moors to death, slavery, hell from the Catholic Church. And see, when the Catholic Church condemns you, it is a forever thing. It's not like, if anyone has ever studied the Reformation, people like Martin Luther, John Wycliffe, you will understand the Catholic Church is ruthless when you try to take its power from it. So, these Moors were condemned to death. Some of them tried to flee back to Africa, but remember, countries in Africa and in Europe enjoyed trade together, so when these Moors landed on the shores of Africa, a lot of them were killed by the African people. See, they had become not only enemies of Europe, but also enemies of Africa. So, what was their next move? They ran here to the Americas with the Europeans hot on their trail. See, a lot of people believe that it was exploration that Christopher Columbus came over here. No, it was not. Christopher Columbus was in warships when he came over here to these Americas. Now, places like Scotland and other European countries, well, had knowledge of the Americas. Absolutely, because a lot of Egyptians went to Scotland. Scotia is whom Scotland is named after, and that was an Egyptian princess. So they were familiar, and the Egyptians, as we well know, knew about the Americas. So knowledge was passed to certain Europeans, but these particular Europeans from Spain, England, they knew very limited knowledge about the new lands over here. But they pursued these Moors for one reason. Those Moors had, during the rebellion of the Moors, in which they lost, they took something that was very valuable to the Catholic Church and a symbol to those Europeans. They took a scepter, a religious scepter, and these people wanted it back. It was like they had stole the Holy Grail, and they wanted this back. So when they came over here, they noticed that there were some people here that had the same look as these Africans did. Yes, I'm saying that you cannot tell some of the Africans from some of the Indians that are over here. They had the same skin color. And that caused a lot of strife. It caused a lot of strife. Some of these tribes were friendly to them, and some of these tribes were not. Because these Moors had married into their families, and they were protecting their families because they had kids by these, these men. They were the brother-in-laws and uncle-in-laws and things of that of these people, and they weren't just going to give them up like that. So, you have two types of Moors, is what I'm trying to explain to you. You have the Moors, which are rebellious and are marked as international criminals and thieves. And these are the Moors that ran over here to the United States. Then you have Moors that were still all over Europe, that were still loyal. And there was a way to distinguish them. See, when you're in Europe, family names meant something. It distinguished you from a peasant to maybe royalty or being a nobleman. People understood your place in society by your family name. That's why genealogy is so important. Genealogy didn't start here in the Americas. Those people in Europe have records that go all the way back to the Dark Ages of who they know who their people are, because that's what establishes their status in their communities. Now, when you're a Moor over here and you're trying to say that you're a Moor and you can't trace back your history to the loyal Moors, you're going to quite naturally be considered a descendant of one of the rebellious Moors. No doubt about it. And you're labeled as a criminal, a thief, a murderer, and everything else. See, these Moors are running around here, and a lot of them don't know their history. They're saying that they're Moors and they can't trace themselves back to an original Moorish family, and they're becoming enemies of the state. It's just a bunch of people that found out what a Moor was and started claiming it without knowing the history of it. If you can't trace yourself back to a Moorish family, not within the United States, outside of the United States, 90% chance that either you're a liar or you belong to the criminal set of Moors. And it's in their blood. The first thing, when you disagree with these Moors, first thing they want to say is that you're an agent. Well, why would they be saying that? They must be looking over their shoulders all the time for agents, because we don't worry about agents out here in the real world. There's no agents. There's police officers out here that we see every day, but there's no agents. You must be concerned about being involved in a high-priced crime. For agents to be looking for you, you're a criminal. So that is pretty much, and we will have the citations for everything that I talked about in this video on the video screen, so you